good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. We're so glad you're with us today. I am Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I welcome you on behalf of the members of our leadership team, which aside from me includes former Congressman Mel Levine and former Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. Welcome and many thanks to Jennifer Rubin. Each year now for 5 years, Jennifer has graced America at a Crossroads as our anniversary guest. She's a great analyst, and we could not have a better anniversary guest analyst. So we are so grateful to you, Jennifer, and to our dear late friend David Lehrer, who first reached out to you so many years ago, is smiling as we maintain a tradition which began through his initiative. And of course, welcome to today's moderator, the outstanding Larry Mantle. I will not dwell on the 5th anniversary of America at a Crossroads, other than to thank you, our audience, for your ongoing support. It is only because of you and the intensity of your curiosity and intelligence that we can continue to pursue our mission. I will also not dwell on the fact that tomorrow evening begins the holiday of Purim. In short, Purim celebrates a foiled attempt in ancient Persia to annihilate the Jews. Rather than say more, I will be putting a link in the email you will get right after tonight's program to a remarkable Purim commentary delivered last Saturday, by Rabbi Sharon Brous of Ikar. Do yourself a favor, take the time to listen to it. It's about 15 minutes, and share it with your family and friends. And I wish you happy Purim from all of us here at America at a Crossroads. Next Wednesday, March 19th, we will hear from the New Yorker's Susan Glasser, who will be in conversation with Madeline Brand about Trump's cabinet. Now, please welcome my colleague and friend Zev Yaroslavsky for a special short presentation before our program begins. Zev?
Thank you, Janice. It is my privilege tonight to make a special introduction of our moderator, Larry Mantle. In just a little over 2 weeks, public radio in Southern California will celebrate Larry's 40th anniversary as the host of AirTalk, the longest-running daily talk show currently on Los Angeles radio. It airs on LAist, formerly KPCC FM. AirTalk is radio's public square, where people of myriad political views, cultural backgrounds, professional pursuits, and more come together daily for 2 hours to inform, educate, and stimulate us on virtually every subject under the sun. Larry Mantle is a man for all seasons. His command of subjects ranging from politics, government, music, movies, books, and sports, after all, his last name is Mantle, no relation, have made millions of listeners better informed and smarter. No issue and no point of view is off limits on AirTalk. His questions are pointed but gentlemanly, intellectual but accessible. As a chronicler of current events, from the history-making to the mundane, Larry is characterized by respect, credibility, and above all, his integrity. Some of the notables who have visited with Larry include Barack Obama, Jimmy Carter, Rosa Parks, Aretha Franklin, Quincy Jones, and hundreds of governors, senators, cabinet members, and prominent philosophers, authors, and even a local politician or two, and of all parties, of all parts of the political spectrum. For the last 5 years, we have been privileged to have Larry as one of our 4 regular interlocutors. He has taken on this task with his inimitable work ethic and enthusiasm. So we wanted to take this opportunity tonight to join with his colleagues, friends, and listeners in congratulating our own Larry Mantle on this incredible milestone. Larry, we are so grateful to have you as part of our team, and we are honored to call you friend. Happy 40th anniversary to you and to your team and to AirTalk. And now I turn it over to you for the program.
Zev, I'm overwhelmed. Thank you. That means so much coming from you and Janice and Mel. I thank you. It's hard for me to believe. I've been hosting for 40 years. It goes so fast, as I'm sure you feel about your career in politics and your work as an academic after that at UCLA, and Janice in law, and Mel, of course, in Congress and in law. I mean, these years go so very fast, but your words mean a great deal to me. Thank you Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate it. And I'm so glad, Zev, that you'll also be a part of our actual 40th anniversary broadcast, which is so nice. It's an honor again to be with America at a Crossroads, to be here with the fifth anniversary of what these extraordinary programs have brought. Tonight's guest is just another example of the caliber of thinkers, of writers, of leaders, of people who reflect on the world in which we live today and not only offer their critique, but also have real substantive suggestions for the ways that we proceed in the world in which we live and the things with which we grapple these days. So I'm deeply appreciative to Jews United for Democracy and Justice, for these America at a Crossroads programs, because I think they're doing such important work on bringing these issues to the fore. Introduce our guest now, Jennifer Rubin, whose first career was as an attorney for Hollywood studios. She did that for a couple of decades. Her focus was on employment law. But then after she moved to Northern Virginia from Los Angeles back in 2005, she started writing about politics, and it didn't take long for her to start gaining an audience. She was a freelancer at first. Then she started writing for conservative publications like Commentary, The Weekly Standard, PJ Media, Human Events. In 2010, she began a decade-and-a-half run as a very high-profile columnist for the Washington Post. In January, she left the Post to co-found the Substack publication, The Contrarian. The publisher has been a guest on these programs many times. Its former ambassador and former Obama ethics czar, Norm Eisen, who's also, like me, a Hollywood High School alum, and Jennifer Rubin is editor-in-chief. The two of them founded it jointly. Jennifer, welcome back to America at a Crossroads, and congratulations on being the recurring anniversary guest for these series of programs.
Thank you so much, Larry, and congratulations to you on 40 years. You really are a LA institution, and being an LA gal originally, and there for many, many decades. I personally listened to probably hundreds of hours of your programming. So thanks so much. And thanks for having me back. 5 years ago when this started, I never dreamed, frankly, that we would have the audience, the breadth of people. And now there is not a person in public life, I think, that I follow or whom I'm interested in that hasn't appeared at one point or another on this program. It's really a tremendous accomplishment. And every time I'm on the program or listen to the program, I think back to our dear departed friend, David Lair, who was himself a LA institution. So we thank him. I hope in some way this program is his continuing legacy and gift to Los Angeles and to the country.
Yeah, I almost don't get by a day without thinking of David. He was such an important person to me and such, as you say, a civic leader, a very important voice in this community's life. Well, let's talk about media tonight. That's our major focus. We will talk politics, but you have a very unique perspective on the evolution of media today. You made news yourself. You cover newsmakers, but made news announcing your departure from the Post to co-found The Contrarian. You had multiple criticisms of Post owner Jeff Bezos, including his blocking of an editorial board endorsement of Kamala Harris. Since you left, he announced that opinion pieces will support free markets and free speech. But I'm really curious for you, what was your evolution in deciding to go? What was there a tipping point, or was it a slow build? What happened?
Well, certainly there had been a concern by myself and many people in the media world that there had been a framing for the media that at one point was essential, but frankly had been antiquated and inappropriate for the era in which we live. A frame that says we have two pro-democracy parties, they have different views, but basically they're both equally devoted to the Constitution, equally devoted to improving America, was once upon a time, I think, reasonably accurate. It's not anymore. And the failure to adapt and to clearly understand the moral and political stakes that we are facing at this point was a growing concern. And then in the past 12 months or so, as Donald Trump once again returned to the presidential race and won the Republican nomination, and then heading into the race, I became extremely concerned because once we saw that large corporations, large financiers, whether it was media or non-media, were obeying in advance, were beginning to curry favor with him, I began to suspect that something was up. And of course, as you alluded to, the decision not to endorse Kamala Harris and the reason given that was so obviously specious that we're not going to endorse candidates anymore. We had just endorsed a slew of Senate candidates, congressional candidates, local candidates. And of course, to choose this point in time, just weeks before an election, in order to squash a endorsement of Kamala Harris was really an outrage. And the Post readers, many of whom were lifetime subscribers, and their parents were lifetime subscribers, were appalled by this decision. About 300,000 people canceled their subscription. And they did so because they had relied upon, on the news side, clear, unflinching journalism, and on the opinion side, not only a candor and an insight about politics, but I think a moral weightiness that the people there, whether they were right, left, or center, understood the task, the obligation of journalism that is not only candor, but insight and really respect for American institutions. And when that came about, I began to think, I think I need to leave. We all are faced now with existential questions. Is the organization, is the employer I'm working for, is the car I'm purchasing, are the choices I'm making supportive or not supportive of the survival of democracy? Because that's what we're facing right now. We really are facing an existential point. Democracy will either live or not live. And I began looking around and said, well, I've been strongly advocating for democracy for years now, and I have been critiquing Donald Trump, but is the institution that I am working for now part of the problem? And it went from bad to worse, obviously. Jeff Bezos, along with other media tycoons, gave the Trump Library $1 million, or rather the inaugural committee $1 million. And that was appalling to me. Can we imagine the Grahams or other great media families giving $1 million to a president? And then we saw other media companies begin to kiss the ring, bend the knee. We saw the settlement from ABC, $15 million for really a specious kind of lawsuit. So this continued and continued. Our Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist was told she couldn't run a cartoon that mocked Jeff Bezos. And that really was the beginning and the end.
The final.
I said, I can't have an audience who every day wonders, is this really what Jennifer thinks? Is this Jennifer trying to mollify an owner who's trying to mollify a presidential candidate, now a president-elect? And so together with Norm Eisen, who's a great friend of the program as well, and I decided, let's take a leap of faith. Let's try something new. We were not the first people to move to Substack. And I have to say, it has been a wonderful platform. Many people who used to be at large media institutions have taken the plunge either there or on other platforms, which we should talk about. And I think in some ways, I can't believe it took me as long to go, but the timing was very fortuitous. And we could talk a little bit about that.
You probably saw it's at 5 million subscribers. So Substack is really taken off.
It absolutely is. And I think it's because of a few things. One, because it's the ultimate marketplace of ideas and meritocracy. You like somebody, you want to follow them, and they're there. And it's also a very user-friendly site. And what's more, the intimacy that you get with readers, viewers is tremendous. We do live chats 3 times a week. And you really feel connected to the audience. We listen to them, we invite them, there's instant feedback. And I have really enjoyed that aspect of Substack.
I should mention those are the paying subscribers. There are a lot more people reading things on
Yes.
Substack,
Yes.
but those are actual paying subscribers. I just want to remind our viewers you can also ask a question of Jennifer in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and feel free to include your location as well. It's kind of nice to know where you're asking the question from as well, and we'll get to the questions a little bit later. So you've laid out very clearly why for you it would have been wrong for you to stay at the Post. But does what newspapers write, the editorial positions they take, does it really matter when people are so sorted now politically anyway? I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a presidential endorsement in the Washington Post would really matter to anyone. Now, smaller things that people don't know as much about, yeah, I could see highly influential. Presidential race, I don't know. The timing, of course, highly suspect, as you pointed out. But do newspapers really have influence now?
They have less influence than they used to, I will say, in part because they're losing their audience. And the same could be said of cable networks. When you take your audience for granted, or you're grasping for some other audience that doesn't exist, you are going to lose relevance. You are going to lose your readership. And I think an endorsement is more about the paper in some ways than the person you are endorsing. Yes, it's helpful to readers, and particularly for down ballot races, as you know, where it's sometimes hard for people to get information. But what it really lets the readers know is, what are our values? What are our principles? How do we evaluate politicians? By what criteria should we evaluate politicians? Every endorsement comes with a rationale. It's not just vote for this guy or vote for that gal, they're the best. It really takes into consideration the importance of character, the importance of experience, the importance of constructive pragmatism. And so when a paper sets forth a expression of support, they're also explaining themselves, and it reveals the soul of the paper. And that, in some way, was why this decision was so bad and so dangerous. And as was alluded to, it got worse after I left, because then they came down with an edict that you shall not write what you want, you shall write what the owner of the newspaper wants. And telling opinion journalists what they can and cannot write is an anathema to many people, to the readers and to the writers themselves. And by the way, this notion that it's in support of free markets and personal liberties, I thought free markets and personal liberties included the right to say what you want, the right to express your views, the right to have different opinions than your employer. So the whole notion, I think, was dishonest, and one more blow to what has been a great American newspaper. And sadly, you continue to see the exodus. Ruth Marcus, a former colleague, good friend, just announced her departure on the similar grounds that I gave for leaving.
The Los Angeles Times for many years has had almost exclusively liberal columnists and op-ed writers. The editorial board has taken consistently liberal positions. So now Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong said that he wants to have a diversity of opinions. He's got this AI bot that analyzes the opinion pieces and says, where there are other places to get different points of view, and sort of where the opinion piece is coming from. But liberals weren't complaining when the LA Times, when Jonah Goldberg, like the only conservative who's in the pages of the LA Times. So, there's conservatives are very skeptical about this. Well, is it only just when it goes in a conservative direction that then liberals are outraged? No one was complaining about the LA Times before.
Well, you have had great conservative journalists, including now, I'm not sure whether he's still there or not, but you have Jonah Goldberg, who has been on the pages. The Washington Post has always been a little different. It's always had a very wide ideological array. And that's one of the reasons why the statement from Mr. Bezos was so disturbing. It has gone from Ruth Marcus to George Will, the whole panoply, and people to the left and people even to the right of George. It has always been dedicated to the proposition that you'd have a lot of voices. And when you saw State of the Union, you could get 4 or 5 perspectives on the same speech. It was a delight for readers, and they craved that. And as technology observed and we were able to interact more with one another, readers love that. So I do think papers should offer a variety of views, but whatever views they offer, the reader has to be certain that that is coming from a place of credibility, of honesty. Eugene Mayer, who brought the Washington Post out of bankruptcy all those years ago and really set the Post on its path to greatness, came out with 7 principles that he said a newspaper must abide by. And one of the top ones was the owner shall not use the newspaper for his own financial benefit. And that is, I think, in some ways the most important. A newspaper is in the public interest. It's not supposed to be the government affairs department for Amazon or for Blue Origin. It has to be presented on its own merits. And owners, yes, they have their perspectives, but there is also supposed to be a level of journalistic independence that is granted. And that's how great newspapers hold people accountable and hold power up to review by the American people.
And that is, of course, the journalistic ideal, Jennifer. But as you know, when the Chandlers owned the Los Angeles Times, the paper wrote in the Chandler family's economic interest. Hearst certainly wrote in his economic. This is not a totally new thing to have owners of newspapers who come in, at least initially, seemingly with the idea they are looking to save a civic institution. I don't question the original motives of Bezos or Soon-Shiong. I think, it seems at least when they came in, the idea was they were looking to save an institution. So I mean, how realistic is it that you would really have someone with the money to be able to purchase a major American newspaper and then keep that firewall up to where it doesn't in some way reflect their economic interests?
Well, the Graham family did it for generations. And to, I think, a large extent, the New York Times has had the same experience. So I think there have been great newspaper families throughout America, and there have been institutions, many of them now they've combined companies in some ways. And I think, unfortunately, that's eroded. I think I made a category error, and many people did, in assuming that because a paper was owned by a billionaire, or because it was a giant conglomerate behind a outlet, the way Disney owns ABC, the way Comcast has come in to own NBC, that it would make these outlets more independent, that they would say, oh, we don't have to kowtow to power. We don't have to bend the knee because look at all the resources and the power and the influence we have. And unfortunately, we've seen it's quite the opposite. In the age of Trump, we have seen that the political pressures and the inclination to obey in advance, to sacrifice the paper so that other financial interests, other political interests, other social interests are put ahead of the paper is so great that now it has become, I think, a detriment, not an advantage. And we have seen that play out over and over again. I am waiting, as is many a reporter, journalist, viewer, democracy advocate, to see what 60 Minutes does, to see what happens at CBS, that they are being pressured apparently by their owners, Paramount, which is considering a very large sale, to settle a case that's even more frivolous than the ABC case, having to do with their interview of Kamala Harris. That would be truly the downfall of a great news institution. CBS News goes back to the Edward R. Murrow days. By the way, the timing of the play with George Clooney could not be more appropriate, which is on Broadway. I haven't seen it, but we're going to have a review of it from none other than Marvin Kalb.
Wow.
Yes, so
Who's also going to be on this program, I believe, coming up or was recently on it. So yes,
there you go.
yeah.
So, I think these are revered institutions. And I think we now have the problem of thinking, how do we preserve a vibrant free press, given the fault lines, given the decline? And of course, even before this, we had a fragmentation of the audience. Newspapers in many places declined or even disappeared. We were talking just before we went live about the decline of local papers, that we now have a terrible phenomenon that in many state capitals, there's not a newspaper. So how do we fill that gap? How do we continue to hold power accountable? And I think we are in a period of transition, and we're finding ways in which that's possible. One possibility is nonprofit journalism. That's what NPR has done so brilliantly for years, or PBS. And now we have ProPublica, which is one of the most fabulous news organizations, breaks story after story, does unflinching journalism, and has now created partnerships with local outlets so that they can help support local journalists. So that's part of the answer. And I think the new phenomenon of these independent journalists is part of the answer as well.
I think one of the challenges, Jennifer, is how to do the sort of comprehensive thing that a newspaper, the role that it served, the sort of one stop, and you feel like you go through the day's paper, for those of us that loved the texture, the hard copy of a paper. And you would feel like when you were done with it, that you really had a sense of what was happening in your community and the world, from sports to news to entertainment. Now, everything is so fragmented. So you're mentioning ProPublica, so people go there for investigative journalism, or they're going to the Hill, or they're going to different specialized kinds of things, or they'll go to the Contrarian. But there isn't really a model, I think. Even nonprofit, I'm not sure there's a model for that kind of all-in-one. What do you think?
You're right that it's kind of become a smorgasbord. And that takes, first of all, much more effort by the reader. And many people barely have time for one paper when they're really compelled to go find, as you said, 3, 4, 5 sources to find that complete package. Then that's when they resort to things like social media, which has a mishmash of credible outlets and non-credible rumor and all sorts of sites. But I think that is kind of the direction that we're going, that it is going to be hard, with the exception of 2 or 3 very large newspaper entities, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today. And those are really the 3 most viable national newspapers at this point. And I think aside from that, people are going to have to do a little bit more investigative work. We try at the Contrarian, and this is one of the wonderful things about Substack, to kind of create a network of other sites, of other sources that people can go to. We give recommendations. So if you like us, that's great, but also check out these other sources as well. People always ask, what's on your media diet? It's very interesting. You're right. It used to be much shorter. I could make it shorter. I could list, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, all done. That serves the purpose. And now it has to be much longer. And sometimes, as is the case, if you want to be a paid subscriber, which I highly recommend for the Contrarian, there is a cost factor that eventually builds up because you're paying multiple outlets. But I think we have to get away from the notion, frankly, that news is free. And that's one of the things that I think diminished the revenue stream for outlets, and which still serves as a barrier, for example, to start up a local news outlet. People got this idea that they could get their news for free, and it costs something. And I think people have to be willing to make an investment. It's an investment in democracy as well as an investment in just becoming an informed citizen.
Or not even free necessarily, Jennifer, but so highly subsidized by ads. Your LA Times subscription for our Southern California viewers was so heavily what you paid compared to the cost of producing that newspaper was a fraction because there were so many department store and car and all these other real estate ads that no longer exist that were making what you paid the LA Times kind of a minimum. Working class people could afford to subscribe to a couple of papers if they wanted to.
Exactly. And
those days are long gone.
And really, we didn't realize it at the time, but Craigslist was the beginning of the downfall of many newspapers, because once that happened and once people could advertise digitally and once people got their ads elsewhere, that pool of revenue disappeared. And what replaced it, and the ads, however annoying they may be, the little pop-up ads are simply not as valuable to the companies that advertise because, again, the audience is more fractured. It's a smaller audience. So no one outlet can really amass enough of that revenue to defray the cost for individuals. And that's why, frankly, NPR, ProPublica, Contrarian depends to such a degree on donations, on support. And we are going to find out, hopefully the answer is yes, that we provide something of value that people are willing to invest in. And I think right now, when the free press is at such a inflection point, when you see the Associated Press having to sue to get back their White House press, when you see the White House now picking which pool reporters are going to have access to the Oval Office and have the best access to the president, we really are in danger of losing a independent press that is a check on power, that is there to hold power accountable. And we're going to need as much support from readers, viewers, listeners as possible in order to sustain that.
There is then the issue of people having influence. So we saw during the last presidential race, people like Joe Rogan, other people with very large podcasts, big audiences were presumably very influential just because the sheer size. Newspapers can't compete with that anymore. Broadcasters can't compete with that anymore. The size of our audience in radio, even nationally, pales. So it means that those doing traditional heritage style journalism are not going to be as influential. It's going to be the podcast host.
Right.
What does that mean for our political future?
Yeah, let me take issue with that just a little bit. And that is, I think you can, Joe Rogan, very successful. We're not going to compete with Joe Rogan on substance, but the model of having a Substack and then having YouTube and then having TikTok and then having Instagram. We want to be everywhere that potential readers, viewers, listeners are, and having podcasts. And I think frankly, the Democratic Party and democracy advocates and mainstream media made the mistake of simply sitting back and saying, the voters, the readers will come to us. And now I think we have to be much more deliberate in finding out where people are. People under the age of 50 simply don't subscribe to newspapers, but they do follow TikTok. They do follow YouTube. So we have to be there too. And although they may not get the full story, they will get what we hope is enough of the full story that they'll then click through, be able to follow what we're doing. And like you, we are making a commitment to a different kind of journalism. If you watch an interview on a cable news network, it's a 2-minute, well, not 2 minutes, but a minute question from the host and a 10-second answer from the person being interviewed, who is then interrupted by the host, who then asks another question, which doesn't frankly reflect that the interviewer listened to the answer. The way I explain to people, and you may get a kick out of this, is we do NPR style interviews, which is a short question, giving the newsmaker, giving the expert the breadth of time to explain something to people, listening carefully, following up, so that it is a conversation in which people come away saying, I learned something. Sometimes that comes, as you know, from a politician. I personally love interviewing historians. I was a history major at Cal Berkeley, and I still do that. Authors, and then ordinary people. We've been interviewing, for example, people who've been fired from USAID to explain to people what this entity does, what are the faces of the people who are being affected. So I think you can give people a depth of understanding. We're not going to cover everything, but I really want what we cover to be well thought out, to be deliberate. And I will say this, Norm had an insight that I may not have had at the beginning, and I've been completely converted. Norm was ambassador to the Czech Republic and befriended Václav Havel, the great playwright. And Havel impressed upon Norm that you fight for democracy not only through law and through politics, but through culture, that playwrights matter, film matters, art matters. And in our era, I think that's true. And it also serves as a way to get those people into your sphere. The joke we have is come for the cooking, stay for the democracy. Come for the film, stay for the rest of it. We just hired someone from the LA Times, in fact, Meredith Blake, to write on culture for us. She's fabulous. This week, she's been writing on everything from the gender politics involving Cuomo to, the goings on at the Kennedy Center to all sorts of things, the conversion of culture and politics. So we hope by offering a variety of subjects. Someone may come for the cooking. Someone may come for our pets, where we have pets, very popular, by the way, and they will stick around for other things.
Jennifer, let's before we go to our audience questions, let's talk about what's happening in the world right now. We've got the budget resolution, which we just heard from Schumer that Democrats are not going to support in the Senate. That so it appears there's going to have to be some sort of negotiation. I'm just curious your thoughts about where things stand and how likely do you think we are going to have a shutdown?
Well, here's a great instance in which I think independent media and popular involvement made a difference. I think Schumer very much wanted to sign this continuing resolution, and it looked like he was headed that way. There was a lot of activity on the Hill. And what happened is a lot of prominent voices, Contrarian, Bulwark, other independent media outlets on social media, on Substack, began to raise the issue, what are you guys doing here? This is the rare chance that Senate Democrats have some leverage, and to simply rubber stamp not a continuing resolution that merely continues Joe Biden's budget, but in essence sanctions a lot of what Elon Musk has been doing, would be a grave mistake. And you know what? Politicians do listen. And there does become an amplification effort. And very soon, within 24, 36 hours, the sentiment on the Hill changed dramatically. And that's because people on social media, engaged viewers, independent media, other outlets began to explain why this is a problem. And although we have a fragmented media, we also have a media that is capable of amplification. And I think they sufficiently made the point, and now the conversation in the Senate is, what do they use their leverage for? What could they ask for that would have some meaning? And there are a number of possibilities, including putting back funds that were essentially illegally and unconstitutionally impounded by Elon Musk. Another would be to extract some kind of public pledge, even if legally these people don't seem to abide by anything. At least they will be obligated publicly to agree that whatever budget is passed the money is actually going to be spent. In other words, oh my gosh, Congress really does have the power of the purse, not Elon Musk. So there are a variety of things that they could ask for and influence they could have. And it is imperative, I think, for Democrats on the Hill and maybe a few Republicans to wake up, that to remind themselves that we have another branch of government other than the executive. In fact, it's the first branch of government. It's Article 1. And when it comes to spending and it comes to our budget, it should be the most important. So I actually think this could be a very consequential moment where, if not a stop sign, maybe it's a speed bump for Donald Trump, and at least some awareness that the power of the purse resides with Congress and not solely with the executive.
I'm just trying to think from Trump's perspective, though, what would be his incentive to compromise? Because if in fact Democrats don't pass it, then, he can point to Democrats shutting down the government. He's not someone who wants to compromise. I mean, if it's his idea and then he, sees it's not working, he'll take it back, but he doesn't want to compromise with people. So I'm just trying to think from a practical standpoint, kind of, where do we end up with this?
Well, part of the job of Democrats is to explain whose fault this is. After all, these people do control the three branches of government. And if they chose to go off in a corner and write a budget that was so extreme and a continuing resolution that doesn't include Democrats, and they have practiced a course of conduct that is frankly unconstitutional, this really is their fault. And ultimately, a president, for better or worse, is responsible for not only himself, but his own party. And I think he probably does not want a full stop and does not want the focus on him and what Musk has been doing. Part of this is an effort in public education. Why are we shut down? It's because Trump and Musk not only have taken this extreme view of government and taken a sledgehammer to it, but have been acting in an unconstitutional way. I don't think he wants that scrutiny. If he didn't want the scrutiny, he wouldn't have, if he wanted the government to shut down, he wouldn't have put pressure on Republicans in the House to pass it. He would have let it blow up there. I think they do want government to keep functioning. They do want to keep the cover of an operational government and say, oh, see, we can run things. We're not incompetent. We're not chaotic. Everything is working out great. And it's not. And I think that that does exercise some level of discipline on him.
Let's go to viewer questions. Adrian, Susan, others have said they were hanging in with the Washington Post due to the great journalism. Now, with you being gone, Jennifer, Ruth Mark is gone, they're wavering and they wonder, will the exodus lead to Bezos changing his mind, or does it just so further weaken the newsroom that all the subscribers abandon as the writers have left?
I have come to the conclusion that he does not care, that he sees the Post not as an entity that needs to be kept viable, that needs its credibility to be defended, but it's a tool for his other businesses. It's a way of ingratiating himself with the president so Amazon and Blue Origin make more money. That's the only conclusion you come away with. And when you see him on the dais at the swearing in, when you see the contracts and the engagement that he is getting, when he goes down on bended knee to Mar-a-Lago, you realize he doesn't care about the Washington Post per se. He cares about his other businesses. And unfortunately, he doesn't recognize that a paper shouldn't be used in this fashion. And because of that, I come away with the conclusion that he is never going to do better, that at some point he may get tired of having a newspaper business. He may fall under such ridicule that he is compelled to sell it or do something else. But frankly, I don't think he cares that he's lost such a large percentage of his readership. He is a failure and the paper is failing, but he doesn't care because Amazon is making more money. And that's the simple truth.
Philip said he hasn't canceled his WAPO subscription, but he stopped reading the opinion pieces, because of the switch there. But he asks, do you think that the news reporting has continued to be unbiased?
By and large, yes. And a great many people have left there because they're very concerned about the paper. And unfortunately, we have lost, I still say we, it's a habit. The Washington Post has lost many of its fine political reporters, its business reporter, international reporters. So I think it's a less robust paper. It's a less excellent paper than it used to be. But I think the people there have remained true to their mission. What I worry about, however, is they don't pick their stories. They are assigned stories by editors. And the question is not if what appears is truthful, is hard hitting, but sometimes it's the story you don't cover. The newspaper isn't covering itself anymore. And that's kind of a big deal. When the initial decision to squash the Kamala Harris endorsement came down, the news side was allowed to cover it. And they actually made news. They actually covered it in the same fashion that other outlets did. Now they're not doing that. And what else are they not covering? What other things are they not covering? Well, they're not covering the conflict of interest between Jeff Bezos and the administration, I'll tell you. And they're not covering, I think, what I think is the central perhaps conundrum of our time, and that is really the rise of an oligarchy of which their owner is part. And so I worry not about what's there, but I worry about what's not there. And that is a disturbing pattern.
Catherine asks, does Substack have any relevance given its readers are already committed to preserving democracy and combating the current administration? So, essentially, Catherine's saying, well, what makes it more than an echo chamber?
Right. Well, I think of just like the Post had readers from across the spectrum who are interested. I think we have people who are engaged. I think we have people who are still persuadable, or people who are looking for some additional information. And it's also, I think, doing something else, and that is increasing and developing a community, a pro-democracy community that extends regardless of ideology. The people who write for us, the editors amongst us, we don't agree on everything. We have debates internally on policy issues. And the people who read us, the people who write into us do as well. But I think what we're doing is not only educating people about the day-to-day thing, but we are trying to give people a sense of power. And what I get asked again and again and again is, what can we do? What are we doing? And I think there is a role that Substack is very good at because we do live chats, because it's such a intimate kind of outlet in developing an active citizenship. And I think that's part of the mission as well, and very, very important right now at a time that people don't feel empowered.
We have a viewer who asks, I want to get as many questions in our final 10 minutes here. What gives you confidence Democrats can capably explain the refusal to pass the Republican budget? There's little evidence Democrats can succeed in convincing the public of that. I just add to that excellent question. I was reading a piece, and I can't remember if it was the LA Times or where it was, and the reporter was interviewing two undocumented immigrants who were Trump supporters, and they were concerned about potentially being deported, about being separated from their families, and they still supported Trump. They were critical of Biden for letting all the Venezuelans in. They said Trump had to do this. Yeah, it's bad for us. If you've got people who are undocumented immigrants who are saying, Trump needs to do this, even if I pay the price for it, kind of what hope is it that Democrats are going to somehow craft a message that's going to get people to come over to the Democratic perspective?
Well, first of all, a hot stove is a very good teacher, and people are finding whether it's tariffs and the business community is, oh my gosh, look what he's all about. Maybe we shouldn't have supported Trump. Whether it's that, whether it is in foreign policy, whether it is in abject corruption, I think the public has yet to be completely educated. And oh, by the way, Donald Trump is now 9 points underwater in the approval ratings. So we are a very divided country. and people are in two camps. But there's a critical percentage of people who do go back and forth. And more important, there are a critical percentage of people who have checked out entirely. And I think part of what we do is to get those people re-engaged, particularly young people, but really across the board. We get it. People have busy lives. But perhaps now, for the first time, people are saying, gosh, elections do have consequences, and they are curious, and they want to know what they can do, and they want to know what's going on. It's funny, people have been asking very, I think, persistently and in good faith, well, what are the Democrats in Washington, D.C. going to do about it? And what we say is something different. We have to embrace the notion that democracy is a participatory sport, that great political, social movements come from the bottom up. The reason the Democrats have decided not to go ahead with the CR is because they heard from an educated, engaged population. So will they figure it out on their own? No, but I think a pro-democracy movement that is very broad and that is very committed can make a difference. And we have little we don't have to do it all at once. There's an April 1st election in Wisconsin, for example, on a critical state Supreme Court. People are volunteering in droves. People are giving money to that. That's a test of democracy as well, because Elon Musk is trying to buy it. So there are lots of ways in which we can re-engage people in democracy.
Let me just ask you, and this is a question for me just real quickly. You think that Trump and Musk are going to be joined together for a considerable period of time? Trump churns through people so quickly. I'm just assuming that Musk moves on in the not too distant future. Do you think they're going to be together for, say, a full year?
I think maybe not a full year, in part because as he's doing this, Musk's business are taking a dive. If I were a Tesla shareholder, I wouldn't be very happy with him right now. And in part because you've already seen these fissures open up between Musk and the rest of the cabinet, which, silly them, thought that they were in charge of their agencies and departments. So there is an inherent tension there. And as I think is going to happen, unfortunately, as the economy declines and Trump's approval declines, he's going to have to find someone to blame. And eventually, I think there's going to be some kind of parting of the ways.
Cindy and Van Nuys, just real quickly wondering, well, how does Bezos owning the Washington Post make his company more successful? And I think the implication is, well, if he was concerned about this, he could just sell the Post, he could shut it down. He wouldn't, and then not be in the line of fire for Trump because of anti-Trump stuff that's in the Post. So Cindy's question.
Because Trump wants it. He wants the favorable press. He wants Jeff Bezos, who is beholden to him, to own an outlet so he can flack for him. It's his PR department. It's an extension of his communications department as far as he's concerned. So he is going to favor Jeff Bezos with the Washington Post, who can give him laudatory coverage or can tamp down on the criticism in order for Jeff Bezos to keep his contracts. That's much more valuable to Trump than a Jeff Bezos who doesn't own the Washington Post. That's the irony, is he needs these oligarchs to control the media. And this is classic authoritarian behavior. What happened in Italy with Berlusconi? The oligarchs always want to control media, either directly or indirectly, because it elevates them, it insulates them from accountability, and it, in their eyes, makes them more popular.
Barbara was thinking of something I was actually thinking of earlier, Jennifer, as we were talking. She said, can an outlet like Contrarian, she says she is a paid subscriber, become a sort of news consolidator to help readers cope with the fragmentation of media?
Absolutely. And one of the things we do, and one of the great things about Substack, is that we do provide that. Sometimes we do, it's called cross-posting. In other words, someone at a small Substack out there has written something and we think is fabulous. They perhaps don't have the bandwidth, and we don't necessarily have the ability to have them write directly for us, but we will incorporate their post on our site. It's sort of like having a mutual news line. And Jim Acosta, who I was on a panel recently, had a great expression for this. He said, we need a NATO of pro-democracy outlets. In other words, we need these outlets to be able to cross-pollinate, to keep people informed, that if we see something that's terrific in another area, to incorporate them. We have done that, for example, in the foreign policy realm with a great reporter who had an origin in NPR, Tim Mack, who now has a foreign news operation where he has 9 reporters in Ukraine. And we now regularly accept his work product and interview him so that we are elevating him and bringing him to a much larger audience.
Brian is asking about the name The Contrarian because, and I'm sure you've seen the critique online, Jennifer's like, what contrarian to what? This is like his mainstream institutional perspective. So where did the name come from and what is it contrary to?
You know, we had more time, I imagine, trying to come up with a name than anything else. And these days it's hard to come up with a name because there are a zillion publications and you have to be able to, in essence, clear it to not have a competition. And I think for us, contrarian means, first of all, we are contrary to the ethos in what people call mainstream, what we call corporate-owned or billionaire-owned media. We have a different way of presenting truth. We have a different ethos. We do not have a false equivalence. We do not have an effort to sane wash Donald Trump, as many others have. So in that sense, we are a bit of a contrarian. And I think we also take some positions that are somewhat irreverent and that not everyone is going to like, and that we are willing, in the spirit of interchange, the spirit of democracy, to entertain contrarian views, to debate amongst ourselves and to debate with others. And so I think the spirit of the contrarian is not necessarily contrarian to a political point of view, but it's a spirit of inquiry, of skepticism, of questioning that we like to have. And it's a little bit of a swagger, a little bit of an attitude.
Gil Garcetti, who many of our viewers know, former district attorney of Los Angeles County, and I know personally is a true news junkie. Gil, he says he's been a Washington Post subscriber since leaving public office years ago. It was a source of balanced news, and though I'm a political liberal, I always look forward to reading the viewpoints of distinguished conservatives, people like George Will. I don't respect what Bezos has done over the last 6 months. When Ruth Marcus left, I truly questioned whether I should end my subscription. But do I want to see the Post go out of business? No. Any advice?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know that it matters anymore because, as I said, Jeff Bezos wants it, whether it has a lot of subscribers or not, because he's using it as a business tool. People ask me this a lot, and I think every person has to make this kind of moral decision for themselves. On one hand, yes, they're putting money in the pocket of Jeff Bezos, who they may now see as part of the problem, not the solution. On the other hand, there is good journalism being done there. And I don't have a magic answer. I still subscribe because as part of my job is to know what other outlets are covering. But a lot of people have made a different choice. And sadly enough, you can get that news. It takes a little bit more effort by following where those Post journalists have gone. Some of them have gone to the Atlantic. Some of them have gone to the New York Times. A few of them went to the news side on the Wall Street Journal. They've come to Substack. So I would hope that, first of all, people are willing to invest in whatever journalism they like, and that if they still want to support the Washington Post, that they also follow where some of those people who left the Washington Post went to.
I've taken you right up to the end, but I do want to give you a chance. It'll only be like 30 seconds, though, Jennifer. I'm sorry to wrap things up, but I'm kind of curious, if you could wave a magic wand or, dictate the future, where would we be at, say, in 5 years in terms of news available to? What would that look like?
I think we would have, I recently said this, 1,000 flowers bloom, that we would have a plethora of new outlets, some of which, because of the marketplace, take off and blossom and become a broader base in terms of offerings and viewpoint. And that, frankly, people of whatever stripe read some news. They get some news. The percentage of people who voted for Donald Trump who got no news whatsoever was extremely high. And people like to point to Fox News or these right-wing websites. The greater problem is people getting no news whatsoever. And therefore they pick up whatever Hazarai is on social media or, that someone has put on Facebook. So my hope would be that there's a resurgence of democracy and it's a resurgence in viewership, readership for legitimate hard-hitting news. But I will end with this because David always insisted that we say something that we are looking forward to or that we are optimistic about. Yes. And I am optimistic that Americans are rediscovering their power, that the protests, the town halls, the influence that they're having in Capitol Hill is the beginning of a resurgence of American democracy. We see it every day at the Contrarian, and we applaud we applaud the program here for engaging people to the degree they do. And we would just say, send your friends, tell your friends, join us.
And Jennifer, congratulations on the honor that you're getting from the UC Berkeley School of Journalism.
Thank you.
Cal, your alma mater, the Herb Cain honor, named for the great columnist of the San Francisco Chronicle for all those years. Congratulations on that. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on our program this evening. As always, of course, we're back next week with yet another, but please financially support these programs. Jennifer's been talking about it for the past hour, that it's nonprofit programs, and this is a nonprofit organization that puts these on, are able to bring you these kinds of programs in a way so many others aren't. So please make your contribution to Jews United for Democracy and Justice. You can go to the website JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org. That's JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org to make your contribution. We thank you for that. So the next program is going to be next Wednesday evening, March 19th, 5 o'clock Pacific time. The New Yorker's Susan Glasser in conversation with Madeline Brand. The topic is President Trump's cabinet. That's next Wednesday evening at 5. From all of us at America to Crossroads. Have a wonderful evening.